Okay, welcome to cheerbow.com, and today we are working on the journey of the U-bow stave. I'll put there. That's 203-10. Anyhow, this was a pretty beefy stave, and I'm having to bring it down, scale it down. I'm just doing a general rough down for this to become an English longbow, anywhere from 50 to 55 pounds. And it has a little thicker than normal sapline, but that's okay because we can bring it right down. What's important is the fact that it's good quality sapline. That's what you're really interested in, is the quality of that sapline, is all the way through. And it looks very stable, and I can easily knife this down. And so far the wood looks very, very if you look at the end grain, I don't know what you can see it there, but it's got a nice tight grain, and I'll be able to show that better when I cut it a little flatter, when I'm more committed to the actual length, which will be 72. Anyhow, right now, put this thing up, showing what we're doing down here. I've got this marked. There's a line right to here that I'm following from the front of the stave, and I'm just knocking down. I'm just making this more manageable because it's pretty big. And let's see, I don't know if that you can see or not. Okay, and I'm just going to show a little bit of this. This is coming off a nice, thick, nice peels. I started this a little bit ago. I'm just going to do a little bit of it here. I've already flattened this out down a little bit so it lays better in the, when I flip it over, work that back. We're getting all this into more and more detail, but right now all I'm doing is I'm preparing this stave to be manageable, because there's some minor defects right into here where there's kind of a surface crack, but that's okay. It's going to go. Be completely cut off. It's a surface check that just goes straight down, and deal with them all the time like that. Even from this view along here, the sap line looks nice and really creamy. It's thicker than we want, but like I said, we'll knife it down. So bringing it to that line that I have here. So I'm trying to make this about say 2.5 to 3 inch wide, because it was much wider than that, much wider than it needs to be. And of course, in that area, material wasn't very good. I also want to bring this down so I can actually put it in the bandsaw and slice it a little better, because the bandsaw I have is fine, but it's just a little bit small for some of this big stuff. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to take this down, and the idea is, of course, is like I said, I'm just trying to make it a stave that's about 2.5 inches wide on the face. It'll have somewhat of a taper, a wedge. This side has a stronger wedge. And we're just cleaning up, we're looking for any defects as we go down in here where they travel to. And then we'll probably flip it up on its belly and clean up this sapline a little bit, bring it down some. That'll be in the next video. Alright, I'm still knee deep in chips. We've about got this thing scaled down. We pulled some pretty big slabs off, like this guy right here. It wants to go, let's let it go, because we got plenty of mass. I like it when it does that, as long as it rips straight. saves me a lot of extra knifing. As long as it doesn't go too far in, it's got plenty of area to work with there. And this doesn't have to be perfect here because I'm going to be running through the bandsaws. I'm going to be narrowing down the belly of this as well in a little bit of, probably before I even do the back, as far as the back cleanup. I just want this stick to be a lot more manageable. So now we're just going to put this thing on its back and knife down some of the belly. I will probably grab this marker here. We'll just run it down to about right here. This is just a general go-to line like I do all the time. So I'm in a safety zone. Don't take off too much material. Here I'm looking to see are any check marks are occurring, how far down it goes into the stave. It's cooperating pretty well. Not all staves knife so nicely, but it's doing well. Alright, I'm going to keep on doing this part of it back over here, and that'll have brought it down to about the belly thickness that I need to work with. Some more knifing here in this belly. Alright, and what I'm looking for is any of the previous defects that may have been in the belly region, and to remove any potential twist that could be getting the right material moved out of the way. More looks like. I'll be sweeping out. This is only some of it. I've actually swept out a lot of it. As you can see, the chip mass on the floor, huh? I don't know if I can. But anyway, this is what I work in frequently. We have this reduced greatly in mass overall. It's been brought way down. It was basically more than twice this size. Had a lot of defects on the main side you saw me knifing on. This was the side that's was sawed down with from the provider, and just it was left in a massive chunk with this side here had a lot of defects down into the belly, but we got down in and I prioritized this side to check to see what was going on. We got plenty of width. The narrowest point we have probably around 2 inches, which is more than enough, and it looks like it's good quality material, not too much of a slope, still make a good handle region. That's what I was seeking, was that, and it's got a nice stable smooth sap line. We're going to dig into it a little bit though, because it's a little bit thick. That's all right. I'm taking down many of these to make a good English longbow. So I have a line drawn on there. It's going to take it down to roughly about 5/16 or so, 3/4 of an inch. It's kind of a general zone. And the idea is to get it a nice, consistent, smooth, slick line. I will try to get as close to a continuous ring run on there as possible in most areas. Nice 1/4 inch sap line all the way down is good. I wouldn't go any less than 3/16. And you have something substantial to work on the back of the bow. That seems to be a standard even in the Bowyer's Handbook. You can go wider on sap line if you're doing like a wide flat bow and it has maybe a veneered belly kind of thing, but with a decross section English longbow, no, you don't want that. That's not what you're trying to do with it. It doesn't work that way very well, if at all. I try to follow this crown that's here and keep that as much as possible. And I can even, a lot of times I can even find the main ring and stick with it for the most part. But what's going to happen here undoubtedly is after I do layout, put the taper in, there's going to be a dimensional change in this. I've seen it many times where even though at this point here, I'm bringing it down to say 5/16. Believe it or not, when you change it, you're gonna have a slope, and it'll actually be more wood than you realize because we've got kind of a wide crown here. But I'm doing it right now to accommodate the situation. Now it also gives me an opportunity to see the status of this sapwood, to see what kind of condition it is all the way down. This is the time to do it. Now though, I'm just getting rid of. This also allows me, if there's any defects, any check marks in here, while the bow is wide, this will allow me to discover my layout points, priority points, what I can get away with on the back of this bow, back of this stave. I have a narrowest point of about 2 inches. I'm going to kind of use that as a center line. But I'm going along this as I'm removing this excess sapwood to see where there could be any kind of defect, which could be unforeseen. It allows me to prioritize the layout in the most choice locations. Kind of see we have a lot of rifts in there. You can get really close to a single, at least where it doesn't have a lot of overlapping rings. Want it nice and smooth and slick. Kind of like what you do with shagbark hickory, which is all sapwood when you go to make a bow. You don't want to violate this surface crossways or at an angle. And right now I'm seeking out any places where there is any natural ring violations or divots that could potentially, make that weak. All right, I'm going to continue this, and on the next video we're going to be going into doing a layout on this bow. Most likely we'll have it cleaned up enough and doing a center line and beginning to taper, etc. And you can probably see we've got a nicely surfaced bow. A little bit of a mild surface abrasion where it's static, but that'll go mostly away. It's nothing serious by any means. It's good, stable still, good sapwood all the way down. Has a nice crown here at the end. Running about 35 to 40 growth rings per inch, which is nice that works very well for this type of bow and its poundage that's being asked of it, which is going to run between 50 and 55 pounds at 28. And from what you can see here, has a pretty nice crown. I had to take down some of the sapwood, and I may still take down a little bit more in some areas, maybe not. We'll see how it goes. What I'm going to do here now is we're after finding center, and I'm just going to kind of play with this line first, kind of see. I'd like to keep as much of this as possible, which I think we can. The priority, though, is in this center line where the gap is less, because up here on these guys here where it fans out, you're running about, say, 2 1/4 or so. The very center where the handle would be is running right about 1 5/8 inches, which is plenty of mass. And it has plenty on the sides and flanks. And down here you're running about 2 1/2 or so. So we have a 1/4 inch change when it comes to maximum width. So, we better get our center line marked. I'll get center for handle, which is obviously 36 since we're dealing with a 72-inch piece. 34, 38. Okay, this is different than a flat bow. I always tell these guys, I say it all the time. This is a bend through handle. We're going to be creating a taper based on every 8 to 10 inches it falls in. It's going to be based in that general zone. Get this guy out of the way here. Okay. Now we're going to use this guy. I'm going to go from, I'm going to experiment from either end, but I'm going to start here and see what happens on this narrow end here. I'm going to kind of come off of it and go into my taper. The priority here is making sure we have plenty of mass and uniformity coming off that handle. It looks good. Looks like really good right there. And if I can even snap a line right there. And got plenty of masses on either side. Looks good. We're following a good line here. Looks decent. Okay, that's all we need to see is that right there. All right, with that settled, we now can make particular marks, black marker, only in these areas that are static that are going to be cleaned off. It's going to become horn material anyway. And right here's our main center line. On either side, I go about 3/8 or so, which is pretty much standard in bow making anyway. On a flat bow, it's going to go like this. In the rough, you know, some people jump right down to a half, which is fine. But if it works for them, that's good. I prefer to have a little bit of tapering space for margin of error because of different reasons. Okay, so what I like to do so I can keep my line is I just take a pencil and gently trace on top of that line all the way down, because this is obviously chalk dust. It'll go away, and I like to keep this line for registering center. Do not press hard. Just kind of a nice light line that we can see all the way through. This worked out really well for this end down here too, because there's really good the end down here where it looked a little bit abrased, but the sapwood is in really good condition on either side here. Over here on this far side was the biggest concern, and it still would have worked because it's still stable. But it's better this way because you're on the crown. I like it, the fact that we're on the crown of the back, for the back of the bow. You can still make a bow pretty reasonable, a little bit of offset crown. I prefer not to. Ideally, you want to get as much of the center of your bow right here at the peak of the radius. On this one here, there's enough space where I could have gone probably this way a little bit more, but it's not necessary by any means. Okay, so we'll brush this dust off. Got our center down the stave. We're gonna make our marks down here. This actually has a really nice stable sapling down the back. It really is. Even though I had to take it down, it was thicker than needed by any means. Like, you want this to be around no more than 5/16, but actually a quarter when it comes down to this D-cross section longbow, English longbow. A 1/4 of an inch sapline is actually what you really want. Okay, now fix some little wiggles here so this doesn't change visual direction on us. Okay. Now, taking my straight edge piece of hickory, I don't taper this, whoops, I get my minimum on the handle here. I like to go 3/4 on the other side of the handle in general. I mean, it may be less, but it's never more than 3/4. I jump to that 1/2 inch, 1.5 inch in general. I mean, if the material is there. Sometimes it winds up being less. Here we have this side having a little bit more, which is fine. Okay, and this is kind of the, right on the edge here is where we go to. All right, and the back of the bow is oversized to allow true tapering to occur. You want to, if you jump into your taper right away, you're going to have this is a little different even than I don't think you even really want to do that exactly with a board bow, because you want to be able to have material to adjust as you begin your tiller and you're working with. It's a lot harder to add the mass back on than it is to take it off, by all means. Okay. And I leave this a little eccentric, and I take my bandsaw blade when I do it, or knife, and I go about a 1/16 from the edge of the line or so. And then we rasp it from there, knife it from there. But if you really want to put yourself in a tight spot and actually minimize your material that's available, go right to your, assumed measurements of, you're going to go from, say, an inch and 1/4-ish, so to speak, up to 8 to 10 inches, go down to about 1 1/8 inches, 1 inch, 7/8, 1/2 inch. If you do that right away, you're really binding yourself as far as limiting, putting limits on how much you can adjust your stock. And these are things you really have to think about when you are preparing the back of a bow. I've made the mistake of getting too close. Came out with kind of a glorified noodle. Sometimes I'll use a knife to do this taper. Sometimes I will use the bandsaw. It just depends upon the condition, what it calls for. Okay, it goes right to the taper there. You want always a margin of error on the back of the bow. You want your taper to be a bit oversized so you can shrink it down through a process that I use, chamfering and bring creeping in, which I've showed in other videos that I do. I don't know if it works for anybody else, but it does work well for me, and I've made a lot of bows that way. Okay, so here we have it. Let's scan down this quickly with the camera. You can see what we've done here. Looks pretty basic, pretty simple. But having all your lines in really the right place. And on the back of a bow, this is pretty simple. I mean, this bow here, if you sight down it, it's nice and smooth. It doesn't have a bunch of bumps and twists all over where the back is hopping all over the place. That is, of course, why we go into the next subject we'll cover when we taper this, because we're in stage 2, which is marking the back of the bow, and then also cutting the general rough taper out. Something I just noticed when I was getting ready to put this on the bandsaw to cut it is a lot of my thickness is still pretty tall there. I don't need that height. When I only need about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches at the very most. And we're looking at 2 inches, stock. That it's kind of a fight with the smaller bandsaw. If I had a great big bandsaw, it's not that, it's only a 10-inch bandsaw, so it's a little bit of a fight. Since we don't have a lot of belly knots, which is one of the great reasons for the bandsaw, okay, what I'm going to do is continue the rest of this off cam, and then in a few minutes we will be then running it through the bandsaw. Talk to you in a bit. Okay, we're back with thinning this thing down. The priority was to keep a good amount of mass in the handle region, which there's plenty there. And you see where we take it way down, it's plenty of mass to create the decross section, which we're focused on doing that. The cool thing about this particular stave is, by its design, and not all bows will work this way, is it'll actually create a great flat bow as well. We've brought it down to where the bandsaw blade can pass through without a wrestling match and fighting this thing, at least not as much. It will a certain amount because the U is so dense. I got a 4 TPI on here, which works well. 6 TPI is good for other woods. A lot of times I'll use 6 TPI depending upon how clean of a cut I need or want. Okay, all that set aside, I'm going to don my mask here, and we're going to just remove some of this flank here. All right, we're going to start removing this flank material for the taper, the side taper. Okay, a little bit of a struggle with the bandsaw there. This particular piece of U, and this is where you got to really be careful, especially along your sapwood line, because it can easily tear out. You can find the direction that doesn't promote that the most. One of the advantages of the bandsaw is such a clean cut. This is still a good way to do this. Now you can see them at this point now where I'm seeing that the sap line in some areas is still pretty thick. So this is one of the reasons why I'm really careful how much mass I leave on the belly of the bow area. Still working this area here. But we're also going to take down some more of the sap line in a lot of areas because it's now revealing itself now that we've changed the mass of the bow. There's locations of it that it's revealing itself as far as, and you can't really tell that on your initial takedown. And now you can, though. It will solve that. Okay, we're moving on now. The last video, last part of the video, we were knifing down, continuing the taper since it was such a warfare in the bandsaw. And we brought this way down. As you can see, this is scaled way down. You know, it's got the taper going on. It's a little oversized, of course. We're still a bit tall down here. I had to focus on making sure that we had proper thickness handle area. And so what we do from this point is I take this big farrier's rasp a lot in these areas like this. Let's see if I can tip this down so you can kind of watch what I'm doing here. Okay, I'm following that taper. It's already there now. Just the back, I've taken down the back towards a pretty steady 1/4 inch all the way down. And I'm also making sure that we have the accuracy of the handle location here where everything is going on. We're going to kind of design the mass of coming off the riser. I'm going to go into that area, and each bow is a little bit different, but a lot of times I will actually prioritize this region, you know, with about 1 1/4 inch by 1 1/4 inch or so thickness all the way around at the early point. So it can fade off. Sometimes about 1 3/8 inches. It depends on how much material is there. And here we're going about 1 1/4 inch. Then immediately we start tapering off this way, dropping every 8 to 10 inches, about 1/8 or so of an inch, something in that category. Of course, I keep looking down because now the belly is actually the priority. I want to look down this belly region and make sure that it is uniform. The back is now spoken for. It's stable. It's got the general tapers there. Everything is located. So now we're really focused on actually what's going on with the flank and the belly relationship. And you can see where we're really removing a lot of material here. This bow stave is really shaped way down. It went from a nearly about 20-some pound stave down to about, it's probably about 6 pounds now at the most. And it'll wind up being about a 3-pound bow. But we're just going to continue rasping. I'll probably knock off some of the height on the bandsaw so it'll save time. So all the tools come into play. Scraping, rasping, scraping, bandsaw, whatever it takes. All right, well, we're going to continue on. We're going to finish up on this part of phase 2. So get ready to, we're going to be working into phase 3, which is floor tiller. And then kind of preparing for actual tiller, which is 4 and 5, because you get into actual tiller and test shooting the bow. All right, talk to you later. And right now, we had scaled that big old stave down to what you see here. And it's looking good. It has a nice, taper and good quality wood grain that I can see here. It looks very, very good. Now we're in floor tiller right now. I'm just wanted to show you where we're at with this. You can see that there's some movement there. This is about where we want to be, not much more. We have a reflex in this across the back. we want to keep as much of it as possible, but we may not be able to. It may level out. It may even take a mild set, but the reflex will reduce that set, allow it maybe to be 50 or 60% less than it normally would be. But you can see it's got a, a nice stable sap line, nice back. It's really smooth. I had to take it down some, which you probably will see in the previous videos. And it's a really high quality, all around good stave. And it shows a lot of good spring back. We're going to try to keep as much of that as possible there, which means we're going to focus largely at first on the tips in. And once again, have you view it. You can see what's going on with this guy. I'll try to get this video off to you ASAP. This has been brought down to about just maybe around 5/8 to 3/4, somewhere in there at the moment. Up here it's about 1 inch and 3/8, which is going to be tapering down even more and more and more as we come down the stave. The goal is to bring this to about 1/2 inch, and this to be about 1 1/4 coming off the riser. The handle will be about, say, be a kind of a blended. It's unlikely, let me check the tape, but it's unlikely it'll be any, well, it is what it is right now, but it's showing it being about almost 1 3/8 at the moment across the back, which is a bit broad for this situation. That'll be shrinking down kind of closer to 1 1/4. You want that 1 1/4 to kind of leap off the riser and taper down about, one every, you can bring it in, say that it is 1 1/4. Say within 8 to 10 inches, it's going to drop down to about 1 1/8. Another 8 to 10 inches would be about 1 inch. They'll drop down to 7/8 and down to about 1/2 inch. That is about the ratio you want to try to expect. It doesn't always be so close. It's just an idea that you follow along. Here. And you can see that it's got its decross section happening. And those color lines, there's a lot of color streaks in there. It's going to look beautiful with the oil on. So anyhow, there you are. There's your view of it in this position. Been brought down to the tapered. I'll probably send some pics of this too. So next we're putting in nocks in this. It's bending enough to get ready to put it in the tiller post. Just right now, the only thing it's in the tiller post for is just to see where our limb movement is happening as far as in sync with each other. And I'm probably going to go, put my glasses on here. I'm only going to go down to about 10 or 12 inches on this at the moment. Just kind of see what's going, say, right in this bracket, just kind of watch where limbs are. Okay, I can go to 15 there. 15 at 15 and 16 inches, we're hitting 48 pounds. But this is a good thing to kind of look at and see where the limb movement, what's happening with it here. I see the tips really need a lot of work, which is expected. We're going to narrow those things way down. We have a bit of a lift there, a little bit of a reflex, which we can work around that. In fact, in a certain sense, the entire stick has a reflex. This has this deep reflex, kind of a recess on the back. This is a slower lift this way. It may be in its favor. I think overall it'll probably help support the bow in terms of the deeper the draw. So let's just max it out at 18. 18, we're hitting 55 pounds at 18 inches. So that gives us a good view of the radius of that arc. For round one, as I call it, we're kind of flirting with the tiller at first, getting a feel for it. Looking at where the tips need to work. What we're going to focus on now, the core looks pretty stable. I'm going to keep it like that for a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be tapering strongly all the way around this, but on the flank and on the belly, it's Generally speaking, it seems pretty, it's in a reasonable evenness. It's not exact, and it probably never will be, but it could be close. We're just going to be focusing on these, getting this tip narrowed way in so that those tips pull in quickly and offer relief on mid-limb. We just have to be careful and not come up with some kind of a hinge of some sort in there, which can easily happen if you go too narrow too quick. We've already had one rounded tiller. I think if I remember right, we got down to like the 18-inch margin, and we found out that it was like a 55 or something pound bow at that range, which is, of course, obviously, which highly exceeds the amount. Took more off the tips, and you're going to see that in the movement here. So if you come down to 20, we have a 60-pound bow at 20 inches. So we'll go to 22. We'll tax it at 22 and see what it's like. 62 pounds. But you see it's getting a nice bend. That's what we're after right now, is that look right there. Tips still need to be worked on. This is going to be a little bit of a game right here because it has that lift in there. It's not totally terrible, but you can see it's working out quite well. What we're going to do from here now, just wanted you to see where we're at with this, Jeff. And we've got to be careful with this limb. I see we have a potential hinge right there. We got to watch that. It's not bad yet, but we got to fade off that core. We don't want to take a whole lot off of here right away because we want that core strength as much as possible. So we're just going to keep working that, feathering that taper and where we see it blending. Our blend is to be right in here. The handle is really close to where it needs to be in mass. Tips need more work. All right, yeah, we're a little faster over here on this side. We got some more work to do right in there. So, you know, we're handling it with great caution, no rushing. We're not pumping bows out for the soldiers on the boat. Thank God for that. Anyhow, we'll be back with you soon. So we're going to watch it in tiller for the sake of video, and I like to review the video. It's a different perspective than just here. So we're just going to take it down to 22. See how nice it's bending there. I scraped off a lot. I focused a lot on this region here where it's wanting to, it's a little bit slower on the movement. And it could use some loss there in terms of weight. So at 26, we're hitting 65 pounds. At 27, so at 28, we have a 72-pound bow. So we need to come down a few pounds. But just the fact that it can go to 72 pounds at that, and it's showing durability, and it's getting more uniform. But we'll take it down to that 26 where it's hitting about 63 to 65 pounds. Tension starts right there at brace. And I see we have a little bit of excessive stiffness here. We got to taper it all the way down. The tip could come in a little bit more, both on the decross section and the flank. I see we're wanting a minor, it's not bad yet, just a minor hinge. We got to watch this spot right there. All right, let's see where it starts bending. We'll take it short on the tiller. I'll probably bring it down to where it's about 60 pounds. And then I'm going to do roughly up to a 5-pound removal in field tiller, which is we're shooting the bow, we're watching it, because nothing is absolute on here. It's like I always tell everybody, you got to watch that bow being shot and see which limb needs to be corrected, and there's typically pounds that need to be removed. Very rare is it ever precise in the field shot right away. All right, we'll talk to you soon. I believe I've taken a few pounds off. We'll take a look at it and see what's going on. My focus, as I already discussed, where I was focused on material removal. Let's see how effective it was. All right, let's take it down to 24. Yeah, we lost some pounds there. That's good. Let's get down to 26. Yeah, we lost some pounds there. That's good. Let's get down to 28. At 28, we're hitting a 66 instead of a 70. So we lost about 4 pounds. So we're on the road to hope there on that. But you can see where the bow is beginning to really get a good even tiller to it. And so at 66, we have about between 8 and 10 more pounds to go variable in that bracket. 65 to 66, which I believe now we can start creeping more towards mid-limb. And a little bit late off the riser. Yeah, I think what we have going on here is we still have kind of a stubborn spot right in here. We got to be careful though. We drop that too quickly, otherwise we run up with a short radius there too. So it's a very incremental spot, very sensitive place. It can fool you into believing to take off more. Both sides of the riser we can remove some, not a lot though. So we're going to have to find those hidden places. A lot of times on the flank, on the inner, on either the outer thirds of that flank, because you got these 3 spaces. You got the belly crown right here, and you got the outer thirds here. So you got 1, 2, 3. You got to really look for those locations where material can, and believe me, it's pretty sneaky. You got to keep sighting down the bow and looking, and it's not always visible. It's very like a little mystery. Okay, so 10 more pounds to go approximately. Talk to you soon. All right, we're going into the more of the full draw, and it's hitting more of the 55-pound range. We like it a little heavy before field tiller, that way we have some material to work with. Sean started the workout with the bow being about 60-some pounds, which is consistent with the last tiller weight we discussed, and now it's lost around 5 pounds. You can see the cast is really good. And I said these arrows are 50 to 55 pound spine, 32 inches long, Port for cedar, and weighing about 500s in the 500s in the grain weight. I think that hugged the other arrow quite well, didn't it? How's it feeling to you, Sean? It's got a good cast. It's a powerful bow. Nice. And now it is time to top it off with the horns. So what we're going to do here is we're going to clip just above here, or just right where the top edge of this line is, right here where the groove is. And then we'll go over the top of that is a buffalo horn will slip over the top. It'll replace that bit. It'll create that bit of length on there. It's going to start out, a lot of them, I get raw horn stock that looks like this, so that it winds up, like this. So it goes through this stage. We bring it to this stage where we can drill it out and kind of sight in and get the hole in the right place. It's flat bottom, kind of put in the vise, and so it can be determined on where that center hole is going to be. So we wind up with this. It's a tapered hole inside, very slow taper, not a big one, but allows enough mass to creep up back and create the ring. The groove. We're just going to get this kind of rounded, get it to a shape. A big guy like this, shrank down to this. I also do photo comparisons of this. I'll have that done too, but you can see the transition down, of course, and this gets refined one more time as well. And they're not always going to be perfect. Some of them turn out to be junk. They don't work. So it's just one of the little risks you take along the way. But now we're going to go drill a hole, half-inch hole in there, and prepare to scale it down to be fitted, oversized on the bow, and then refined from there, which will show those steps as we go. Okay, you can see where I have the horn now. It's put in a position in the vise where I can kind of line up the drill as if how it's going to be on the actual end of the bow. I'm starting off with a small bit, kind of getting about just a little bit above mid-center on the. I want it to be a bit high. I want more mass on the back for the groove's sake, even if I have a taper. Okay, we've got the pilot hole in there. I kind of took a little material off on one side. It was a little bit out of round. I could have got away with it, but I wanted to be able to see it better, so I can create my straight line right down the middle. And oftentimes I'll actually make a straight line that I can visually see. So. And I have a depth checker. I'm not there yet, but I'll take this guy here, and it's about the depth that I would put the horn on in general. Gives it almost an inch or so. I try to go a little deeper than that, but you don't need much more than that with that epoxy, and that fits on just right. Never had one come off yet. So, and I start off with this guy, as you saw. I go part way in, then I have this one that I ground that's got like a 5-degree taper, something like that. And this is what I'll just finish off with in here to get my depth checker here. Got some clearance. We look inside that hole. It's looking pretty good. It's a nice clean cut. And check both of these for depth. We're good. We got it over, a little over, almost probably about 7/8 of an inch to an inch. And so now to create this rounded beveled edge, so it seats down. This is about as close to being, you know, this is still rough. It's still, this is big. It's still bulky, but the general rough shape is there. We seat it on the end of the bow, or it fits just right, which you'll see that process soon too. You can see, this is the one that I showed you. This is the one I've been using as my example one. And you can see now the similarities. Mask. Here. I can show you. You can see the similarities now in the style. I mean, this is just a general rough style, but and each one has its unique qualities just simply because of the horn. Like here, we got bigger shoulders on there. I can probably knock that off. Little things like that, but you can see where we have it tapered down to bleed in onto the bleeding effect onto the horn. I'll probably refine it a little bit more, but once it's on the horn, it'll become, you know, very detailed, as you see on the bows that I make. It'll be very, very defined, very, very highly polished. And so anyway, this is just the general first step that I get. This is what I'll glue onto the bow. The Dremel tool will help me sweep this down into a really nice shape, but we'll have a video of me doing that once this is epoxied onto the end is set up, and that'll be the first thing I do. And right now the process we're working on is installing these horns that we just drilled out and fitted, or well, they're not fitted yet, rather we're getting ready to fit those. I've clipped it off so we don't have the excessive length here. So what I'm going to do is I've got just, you know, where I have a general center line, and there's actually a taper on the inside of this horn that I'm going to try to stay close to near the top. It's not a long taper. It's not, and I'll use this as an occasional check. I already have a couple of lines up on here I'll start off with if I have to, but it's just, there we go. It's about a 5 degree or so, something like that. To get this started so I don't spend a whole bunch of time, is I use my handy dandy belt sander and I roll this tip. You probably guessed that. And so what I'll do now is I'll use my Shinto rasp, the fine side in general, maybe not, we'll see how it cuts, and my Nicholson, depending upon how it feels. It depends largely on how the wood is feeling in terms of material removal. So I'm going to start off with Shinto rasp, keep my horn handy here, start working this guy. I come down about 3 inches or so, and I begin an actual taper. There's a little bit more mass than needs to be in this region anyway, so this allows for some taper to get really fast. That's what you want in there. It's on my shoe or something. But I just work it. Right now I am going a little bit on the rough side. That's okay. We'll take off some more material that way. I get this lifted up, kind of long, stringy, rough spots here. Getting this last inch or so, reducing as much as I can. And I go ahead and check and see how much I've done so I have something to follow by. I'll kind of force it on there and see what's going on. See, it's actually starting to happen there. I kind of twist it a few times, leave an indent to kind of see what's going on with the mass there. And there it is. I have my diameter I can work with from there. I'll go in without too much of a taper up here yet. I go down a little over halfway. And I keep forcing this because I like this exacting size. Then I'll bring it down to where it just slightly drops on. I'll show you that part when we get ready to glue it on. You want space for glue. You don't want it to be really floppy, but you don't want it to be excessively tight. In the old days, they would taper this down to where the horn would barely fit. I mean, they had to pound it on kind of if they had to. So it was basically the same diameter. In fact, the horn may have the horn hole may have been a little bit smaller for sure. Maybe would even barely, hardly pound it on. They would heat it up and force the stick into that hole, and it would cool and contract onto the end of the stick. Okay, a little tidbit before I get these things glued on. You can see where I've brought that, and it kind of drops on. You see how that's where I want it to be. But it's almost there. So, and epoxy likes strong grooves in there. Some people use hacksaw blades, and it works very well for different things. Here I'm using a piece of 60 grit, so I can just do the final cleanup around this guy. I don't need to do a lot because it's so close. And this tip here is following the blade that I used to cut it at that point. This taper allows that for room in this groove as I go up and around. Allows it to go in really deep and full. But you can see here now where we're at with this, and it is oversized. It's just, that's what it's all about, is taking the Dremel tool and files and rasp, and it'll just transform it into, because it's really a lot of extra material on there. So you can see it's really big. You want it to come down and get pretty lean on there because you don't want that much bulk on there. You don't need it. And we've got the horn stock all prepared. We've cleaned everything with some, I use acetone to clean down the horns. I clean the horns inside and out, scrub them all down, all the dust's off. I wipe down the entire bow. And now we're at the point where we're just going to mix up some epoxy. I use, for these horns, works the best. It's inexpensive. You can grab it locally. It cures quickly. Well, I usually let it set up for at least 24 hours. So it's real good and solid. It can be done a little quicker than that. But I also been known to use, and a lot of people know about this, here is called Smooth On. You got part A and part B. I'll just do this one tip here. I make sure I fit this. I got a black mark I've put for the primary center point. And what I do here on this end, this has got a blue inside of it, so it matches this. I recognize it anyway. And it's got a little blue streak there where the horn stops. So what I do here is I put just a pencil mark, and this is where I'm going to see on lineup. You can see how this just slips on nice and easy. It almost falls off, but it's perfect for the glue support in that, and it's a little bit manipulable. You do not want this to be pounded on there real tight, because otherwise you'll have no room. There'll be no. You'll starve the whole area for glue for the epoxy. All right, we're back with some epoxy here, mixed up. We got it enough for both horns, so we got to move quickly. And what I usually do is I just put a little bit on here, kind of work it around. I also load the horn. You got to be very well prepared for this. Everything has to be very clean. I usually kind of work this a little bit. A little bit more. Be generous with it. Don't go, because there's actually more volume inside this hole than you realize, and it can definitely use the glue. I can feel it seating on there really good. Get some paper towel and clean up that slop right here so I don't have to deal with it. I mean, I can leave it, but then it's that much more I have to mess with. You can see where I have this in line with my pencil line there. I don't put a line on both sides because it's confusing, and you want a dominant look going down your, so you can sight it in. You can really tell what's going on that way. All right, so now I use a bamboo chopstick to mix it with. Works pretty good. First thing I do is I take a piece of this clear packing tape and just stretch it on here. It's seating good. It doesn't take a huge amount of tension to do that. A lot of times I'll take a short piece, which I didn't get here right off, and I'll bind it around so it gives it so it binds it by force to the limb. So it has some place to grab onto, because sometimes the tape doesn't want to stick very well. And I can still see everything that's happening underneath. That's why I do it this way. So I'm gonna continue and I'll do the other one off cam. And you can see the results here. Both ends are taped using the clear packing tape. We're going to let this thing set up for 24 hours. You can see this horn is really oversized, obviously, and that's for purpose. It allows material to be worked with and to conform to this bow. What we're focusing on right now, you see where I have it all taped off to keep it from being scuffed too much. And I'm trying to continue this taper up so it has so the loop can slip up over this really easily during string up. But it also keeps a clean, almost a bleeding in profile without a big fat bulge. And you want about a 7/8 inch bowstring, so you don't have, so it sits tight and deep in the deep string grooves and stays there well. So what I usually do is I'll come over here and we won't suffer you through the whole thing, but I kind of brace myself here and just so I can see it right from that angle, and I can hold it right to the deck, and I can just, but you can see what I'm doing here. I'm actually focusing on getting this from the bottom up cleaned up. So we're going to continue this off cam, this part of it. The next stage will be we are going to be setting up the Dremel tool and sweeping down and changing, creating the nice deeper hook in there, more of maybe a rolling back effect. We're just going to use all the material that's here to form this into something that's probably a little bit, it won't be, maybe not quite as long, it'll be close, kind of like that traditional long hook on top. The bottom one is shorter. And this will get smaller yet. It's going to bleed in a little bit more, still in the semi-rough stage. But we've got it down to where we can work it sensibly. And the goal right now is to shape this flank and also clean up and create a deeper hook, cleaner hook, get rid of all this rough look. That's what we're doing now. Some of this I'll take the rasp, since I have more control of it, and I'll probably just, sweep up in these little areas here. We of course now shape these guys to, they're almost to their size, but they'll be refined a little bit more. We'll use some 100 grit, anywhere from 60 to 100 grit to kind of force and shape it. And I know where these knocks go. This is the end up here. This is where the original knock was before I clipped it. And I want it to seat in there. It's going to go in pretty deep. That's why I need a lot of mass back there, or at least reasonable amount of mass. And I'm just going to go all the way around this guy. And this is not even exact even right now. This is a general line that I'll follow. The seat in front and being able to slip the loop up and over, but where it pulls down and cinches tight, deep in that groove, you want to make sure there's plenty of space for the string to have some mobility. Okay, we got this bit in here on the Dremel tool, and it's a 1/8 inch thick. All I'm going to do is scribe a line that's not even going to be full depth. I'm going to be relying on these guys, these chainsaw files, to clean it out. This is the I think this is like 3/16, and this goes up to about a quarter or so, or close to that. And this is just a scribed in line. This is for my rasps to follow. The real work will be done now with these guys here. And I learned over time that the size of this groove is extremely important, because it may string up okay, then you pull on it and the string just flies back out because it has no place. It sort of has no place to go. I've had to learn over the years to expand this. But you can see what's going on there with the string seat all the way down in. You want a lot of play on this. On this part here is really crucial on allowing as much of that 1/4 inch new mass, radius, to allow that string to be able to be manipulated. And I bring it up because it's actually a very important element of the horn knock being effective. Some people go even much deeper and wider in their scoop than I do. I don't like the look. I like to have a little bit of the display of the horn mass as much as possible. I'll even use this guy just to work this little sleeve here, work that hook some more, refine it a little more. But this is my style. I don't get carried away with that hook. It's not necessary. This is the kind of a trademark look that I came up with over the years. I'm not really hung up on an extreme hook. It's kind of a moderate hook there like that. It's not even necessary. Some guys go almost straight, depending upon the boyer and the kind of horn stock, the situation, and how they like it. But you can see now how that seats in there. But this is a little bigger loop than you want. This is a tillering size loop. But what I want is a 7/8 loop that I get the string, either make it myself or get it from my maker, slide up and over comfortably. And I test it with this larger loop. I want to see how it slides up on there, so there is no conflict. Now, obviously, when I get this thing sanded smooth, and the resistance is much less. But what we'll do now is we'll take 100 grit paper. I think 100 grit will work on this, and start shaping it down. So the next time you see this, we'll have both of these looking, you know, in their final form. And we have been polishing down these horns. This has been hit with about 8 levels of sandpaper from about 120 to 1500 grit. It still looks a bit kind of scuffy, but it's actually been really taken way down. It's really, really slick and smooth. So both the horns are worked very, very, including the grooves. There's a little bit of dust on there, but it'll all go. It's actually dusty looking more than it is anything. So what'll happen here is I've left the tape on just so that the rouge wheel won't scuff too much on there. And it wouldn't do too much scuffing. What it'll do is it'll force a greasy residue on there, which the oils of the wood blend with, and then you can sand it off, but it's a nightmare, and why bother? I like to get inside that groove as much as I can. Have to hit it from different angles. Right now, all right, you can see the big difference there in that high polish. I'll probably hit it one more time. I'll probably even hit it with the Dremel tool to just refine it a little bit more, maybe even the groove. But you can even see where the groove is softened now. It's really smooth for slip-in for the string. Okay, you can see now, this is the other side. I've taken the tape off. We've got some sanding due, obviously. We're going to start with a 120 grit and start working out any of the little strikes, little minor tool marks that are in there. We will be putting on this side here, this is going to have the strike plate, a piece of horn right in this region right here where the arrow pass right over that point. It'll also be buffalo horn. So you can, next video we'll probably have the strike plate on. We're going to begin sanding, all hand sanded. I do not use a power sander on this. That is a no. Right now we are in the finish sanding stages, and it's going to go from, I usually take and do a hand rough down of about 100 grit to kind of get things started, depending upon the status of the material. Sometimes I start with 60 grit in some areas to break it down and smooth the lines out, but usually about 100 grit, and I go to 100 grit to 120, 150 or 180. But you can see where this is. And I kind of keep this where I can mark it, because right on this side here, the next step after this will be mounting on a strike plate for the right-handed shooter. But right now we are in the phases. I think I just hit to 120. Now we're going to go to, since it's available, 180 works just fine. This is all hand sanded. I'm just working this whole thing up and down, just very carefully up to the bottom of the horns here, and just smoothing it out. Goes from, we'll just call it 100 grit, 120, 180 or 150, somewhere in there, 220, then 220 to 320, then 320 to 400, and that's on the wood. The horns I've talked about is a different thing it goes to 1500 grit. 400 grit does very well in making a smooth, very closed grain, very sealed, very tight and smooth, so that it's not super porous, but just enough for the moisture to get into the wood. If you go too rough, it's not as smooth and as sealed, tight grain feeling. It actually closes the grain, actually helps seal it a little better. And there's enough for the oil to get in and seal the surface down. But on any wood, but you especially, is a really nice, super smooth, super slick. And I do not use any power tools on doing this, when it comes to the sanding especially. It's more control this way, takes more time. Right now I'm down into the 180 grit range, and I try to make sure as much of any potential rasp lines or scraper lines, I try to resolve as much of that as I can, even with the scrapers themselves. And you have to start doing some meticulous planning as you get closer to your, in your tiller and your draw weights. You kind of have to keep watching that, where you rasp, how deep you go, which, by the way, I should be wearing a mask when I'm doing this, so that I'm talking. So most of my body is probably made up of yew and osage, you know. So when I die and they bury me, I'll be very flammable. Okay. So I always emphasize, yes, don't, when you mess around with yew wood, especially with sanding and stuff without a mask on, because it is quite toxic. There's the guy without a mask right now, but as I said, I'm going to be doing this briefly just as demonstration. So any lines like these, little strike lines, those I have to very carefully remove, very gently. Sometimes it's just very slow and fussy. That's when I get in with 100 grit and strike it down, and then come back and say right now switch over to 100 grit on that. But anyhow, I just wanted to give you it also gives you a chance to find other details, like for example, stuff that you wouldn't just, when you're about ready to oil something, this sanding is like an inspection of the condition of the material, so it's actually quite essential. It also reflects how much care you put into the piece you're working with. All right, the next thing we'll be doing is fusing on a chunk of buffalo horn for a strike plate or arrow pass. It'll raise up about a 1/32 or so at its peak point. That seems to be the most common amount that I ever do, so you don't get a huge paradox on that. And I will be doing that on the next video. And right now we are working on, so we can get this in the video, putting on this strike plate. You see I have a place I've kept unoiled. It's got about 60 grit strikes in there. And I have a little piece of horn that's going to go, I've concaved to the back a little bit, so it's going to lay right on that surface with a good pile of epoxy. and it'll be right where the arrow passes over on center. So that's the next stage of this. I don't believe they always did that. I think it was just more or less dependent upon the boyer and their purposes for the bow. So these little add-ons were oftentimes not always the case. It tends to be more personal preference, and that's kind of what it comes down to. And it's helpful to have that strike plate there because you always have a point for your arrow. But something I do with that is I have another piece here. This is from the cutting off the bottom of a piece of horn just directly off. And it's interesting because what happens is since a horn is stacked, if you look at a horn's layers, it has its own grain pattern. There you can see the circular lines in there. You want to slice off from the face on that. There's some that are a lot more dramatic. There's a lot more. You can see the rings there. They grow in layers. You would think, oh, I just should chop that off and use that little circle for something, and it's not a good idea. Now, if you take it vertically and I use it for an arrow rest, and it's got support all the way through the horn, that's fine. But when you take it and you scale it down to the small piece like this, which was sliced off the bottom, I don't use these this way for that. This will crumble as you are. It'll actually separate. I've actually glued those on. I've learned this the hard way. And I glue those on, and you're filing it down to that 32nd above the surface of the bow, and it's crumbling away because it's getting thinner and thinner and weaker. However, the vertical, even like wood, the length fibers will support that. So that's what I did with this guy, or do now, have for some time. This will be the 3/4 by 5/8 standard. It's typically used. It's a little bit big right now, a little bit bigger, about a 1/16 or so up and down. So I have filing room, and we'll cover that once we get to that point. But now we're going to epoxy this guy on to that location right there, which happens to be right where, I don't know if you can see that well, that's where the hand sits there for the bow arrow. Just sits right beneath it, and we'll demonstrate that once that's on there and finished. All right, just thought I'd throw that in. This is one of the procedures in topping off the details of this bow. It's got 2 coats of oil worked into it right now. And once this is done, this little messy part, we'll be able to do the final 2 or 3 coats of oil, which will cover that as well. All right. The English longbow, and I've got the bulk piece of buffalo horn fused on the side there where the arrow pass will be, and it's pretty tall. It's running about 3/16 of an inch on one side, almost 1/4 on one side, about 3/16 on the other. It's kind of just the way it's laying on there. But anyhow, it's had time to cure real well, and you can see where I have masking tape on there. That is mostly at the moment to keep premature scuffing on it, especially when we start out with a rasp that is fairly aggressive. In this case, though, I'm actually going to take down some of that height right here on the sander, and this is where I have to get really, really kind of pretty precision and careful. I'm just going to basically just lay this on here. You can see what happened there, but that's really tricky. It's almost a high risk thing. You have to really, keep an eye on that. Keeping the bow level. As you can see, I don't have any scuffs on there. It's actually nice and well, what it was before. It's not a big deal. But you see where I have the tape on there. This is just while the rasp is, it's important while the rasp is aggressive, which right now I'm going to go do a little bit of removal with that. And I'm just going to be very gentle. And this is another reason why you have to have the grain of the horn vertical in the strongest point. If it is not that, it'll actually just crumble as you scrape this off, and you'll see why. I'm just doing this really gently here. Just breaking it down a little more, because we don't want this to be protruding above there more than, I would say at its peak point, about 30 seconds. And some of this comes down to like just understanding the basic carving purposes. Basic carving action, which we're just staying in the, this is going to be sort of a beveled edge. It's not beautiful right now, but the material is there to work with. We're going to put a cross in the center of that, which is kind of a traditional way. You don't have to, but it's actually nice to have a marking point, and it looks good. There's some epoxy there. Some of it's got to go. Some of it will stay. As long as it looks neat and it isn't like puddling out the side. You want this to look as neat and clean as possible. Of course, it'll come down to some sanding, you know, refining it that way. As the material gets less and less, obviously we'll get okay. So we're about at the point where I'm going to take the fine file. Okay, we have the fine. I have this one, has the convex radius on one side, the half moon, and then the flat. This is kind of a standard bastard file you could use for metals and whatever else, but it works very well for horn. All I'm going to do here now is just kind of just refine this a little bit more. Bring it to a point where I can sand it, about 8 levels of sanding. That includes all the way around it. We're going to clean off all that paper in a minute. You can see now though, if you compare where we are in height, see there, it's a little less than a 1/16 in the crown at the peak point. And so before I put the cross in there, I'm going to just, you can see what a significantly, you know, the difference on that. And I'm just going to take 60 grit and kind of work around the area and kind of shape it a little bit more. Just kind of get the area kind of refined a little bit better. And I start with 60 grit. All right. Now I got to kind of keep going back and forth with the file. Just kind of keep working this area. So I'm going to continue this, and in a moment I'll have a cross put in here. We'll bring it to the level of polish, sand and polish. Okay, we've shaped this just a view of it here. And I've actually put a little cross, started a little cross in there. I'm going to refine it a little bit more. I don't know how well you can see it from there. And at this point, what's happening is we're just trying to get the bow, the cross in the right place. I have it in line so that basically the hand will go, you know, right, for the sake of positioning here. Your hand will go right there with the right, so for the right hand shooter. Goes right, kind of tucks at the bottom because it's a little bit of a longer, it's a little bit stronger than 3/4, probably about 7/8 of an inch. And all your glove and your gear, your arrow is going to ride. You have some play there. You have, it isn't absolute. You have a little bit of play for that area. But I have the points marked for center, for the handle fit and all that. But that is sort of a standard where the arrow would pass over. It looks kind of rough right now. We're just taking a, I'm using a triangle file and just working that cross in there. It'll actually show up a lot more prominent. Right now it's kind of full of dust. But I'm going to refine a little bit more around here. But this is pretty much a normal with this style. Some of them are completely disc shaped, but this is a little bit of a kind of a well, it's a modified rectangular with the edges beveled around, which I'll probably refine those, make them a little more clean around that. But next time you see this, it'll be polished and ready for another coats of oil on the bow. So anyhow, that's the way that I handle this. Many of these arrow passes, and they work very well, very efficient. Just recent videos, you saw the preparation of the arrow pass. I've actually shaped it kind of into what might be its final form, and it's been sanded to 1500 grit, which is about 8 levels of sanding to get that really slick surface. And it has some natural coloring. You see, and those are natural horn streaks that are colors it was in the horn. You can see where I have it protected around there so that it doesn't get too much on there. We already got a coat of oil on this, a couple of coats, and we're going to go to do that next. I don't want to get this slimed from the rouge, so keeps it clean without getting streaky and having to sand again and again. All I'm going to do here is I'm just going to work this to the obvious. So there's not a lot of surface area, so it doesn't take a lot of time. If you want it to be quick, something like this. You can see the nice coloring in that pass there. So, and the next steps will be, we'll cover that horn, and we're going to oil this guy. Okay, we've come to the point now where we're going to apply oil. And I use the Minwax tongue oil finish, and this is probably the best I think on the market so far that I've used for this purpose. And it makes a fantastic finish. The quality of finish is just impeccable, and within 3 to 4 coats, you know, it's done something. It's very workable. It doesn't have the same issues that some tongue oils have. For the colors coming out in the U, man, it brings this out beautifully. So when you're handling this thing, doing little jobs with it, like say for example the we just did the detail for the arrow pass. You know, there's a tendency to get little dings, and you have to pay attention to those. And well, we've got those cleaned up, and now we're just going to put another coat of oil on here. This is really soft quilted. It's not your cheap paper towel. I use cloth too, but this is the best way to do this, I think. And all I'm gonna do is put a good generous coat up and down this. You see where I have the horns wrapped and everything. That's to keep the oil off the horns. Even if they were not, they are polished right now, but even if they weren't, I would still do that, because then I have to sand again. And all I'm doing here is just putting nice coat. The back here is really thirsty, going to open up that grain from sanding it down to 400 grit. It makes it ultra slick. And you can see what that color is, how much it brings that color out beautifully. What I do with this is I let it set for about 10 or 15 minutes, and I come back and rub it down. And in the winter time, cooler months, it takes about a good 24 hours for it to get rid of, to fully shell out and ready for the next. In the summer months, you can do it within a 12-hour span, depending upon where you live. Up here in Washington State, it's a lot of moisture in the air, so 12 hours is about the shortest I would go in between coats, even in the summertime. So I'm going to let this set for 10 minutes or so. I'll come back with a clean cloth and buff it out. We'll put a few more coats on, so the next time you see this bow, it'll be in its final stage of color and oil, which will be, I would say, probably about 3 more or so rounds to go on that. So anyhow, next video you'll probably see the bow in its pretty much its final form.